My name is Dave Brenner. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 20 years I've been a journeyman electrician. I'm not a storyteller. I'm the guy you call when your breaker keeps tripping or you need to run a new line for a hot tub. I deal in copper, insulation, and amperage, things you can measure, things that follow rules. I live in a small town just south of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've got a wife, 2 kids in high school, and a mortgage that feels like it'll outlive me. I tell you all this not because my life is particularly interesting, it isn't, but because I need you to understand that I'm a regular person. I'm not prone to flights of fancy. Before October of 2018, if you'd told me a story like the one I'm about to tell you, I would have nodded politely, maybe bought you a beer if you seemed like you needed one, and then I would have gone home and told my wife about the nut job I met at the bar. I was a skeptic, not out of any deep-seated philosophy, but just because the world I operated in was so relentlessly physical and logical. A wire is either live or it's not. A circuit is either complete or it's broken. There's no room for maybe. What I saw that weekend, up in the woods near the Osable River, it broke all the circuits in my brain. It took the rulebook I'd lived by and tore it to shreds. I'm telling this now because it's been long enough that the shaking has mostly stopped, but not so long that I can convince myself it didn't happen. It sits in me, a cold, heavy thing, and maybe talking about it, putting it out there into the world, will lighten the load a little. Or maybe it'll just make me sound crazy. At this point, I'm not sure I care which. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened up there. It was the second weekend of October, the peak of the color tour season. My buddy Mark and I had been planning this trip for months. His family has a cabin, more of a glorified deer blind with a wood stove and some bunks, on 40 acres that butt up against a huge tract of state land. It's remote. The last 5 miles are a 2-track that'll swallow a sedan, so you need a truck or an SUV to even get there. For us, that was the appeal. No cell service, no neighbors, no noise except the wind and the animals. It was our annual trip to get the cabin buttoned up for winter, drink some cheap whiskey, and get away from our lives for a couple of days. We'd been doing it for over a decade. It was a ritual. We got up there late Friday afternoon. The air was crisp, holding that specific autumn smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The maples and oaks were on fire, just an explosion of red and gold against the deep green of the pines. It was beautiful, almost aggressively so. We unloaded the truck, got a fire going in the stove, and cracked our first beers. Everything was exactly as it should be. The first night was normal. We sat by the fire pit, watched the sparks spiral up into a sky so black and thick with stars, it felt like you could touch them. We talked about work, about our kids, about the Lions' chances of ever winning anything, the usual. The woods were alive with sound that night. We heard a couple of barred owls calling back and forth, the yip and howl of a coyote pack somewhere off to the west, the rustle of small things in the underbrush. It was the normal symphony of the northern woods, a sound I'd known and found comfort in since I was a kid. There was nothing out of place. Nothing to suggest that the world was about to tilt on its axis. The plan for Saturday was simple. Check the trail cameras Mark had set up over the summer, make sure the deer stand on the north ridge was still solid, and then just ride the 2 tracks on his old Honda 4-wheeler until we got good and lost. That was the fun of it. We packed a couple of sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and Mark strapped his .30-30 rifle in its scabbard to the front rack of the ATV. Not because we expected trouble, but because you just don't go that deep into the woods unarmed. It's a tool, like a winch or a good knife. You hope you don't need it, but you're a fool if you don't have it. We set off around 10 in the morning. The sun was bright, but the air still had a bite to it. The ATV rumbled to life, and we bounced our way down the trail leading away from the cabin. For the first hour, everything was perfect. We saw a doe and 2 fawns, a porcupine waddling across the trail, and a flock of wild turkeys that scattered into the brush with a flurry of indignant clucks. It was just a great day to be out. The first camera was on a game trail about 2 miles from the cabin. We pulled the SD card, swapped the batteries, and scrolled through the pictures on Mark's digital viewer. The usual cast of characters: raccoons with their bright, ghostly eyes, a few decent-sized bucks, and one blurry shot of what was probably a bobcat. Nothing unusual. It was on the way to the second camera location, deeper into the state land, that things started to feel off. It wasn't one big thing. It was a collection of small things that didn't add up. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual fade, like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the world. One minute, the woods were chattering with squirrels and blue jays scolding us for being there. The next, there was nothing. Just the engine of the four-wheeler and the crunch of leaves under the tires. I remember turning my head to say something to Mark, who was driving, and seeing he'd noticed it too. He had his head cocked to one side, listening. He cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was deafening. It was a dead, heavy quiet. Not peaceful. It felt wrong. Pressurized. Like the air before a big thunderstorm. The kind of quiet where you can hear the blood pumping in your own ears. Even the insects had gone quiet. We stood there for a full minute, just listening to the nothing. I said, "What do you think? A predator around? Maybe a wolf or a bear spooked everything." Mark shrugged, but his eyes were scanning the trees, his hand resting near the rifle. "Could be," he said. "Let's keep moving." He fired up the engine again, and the sound felt like a violation, an intrusion into that waiting stillness. We drove on, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The woods felt empty, vacant. All the vibrant life we'd seen earlier had just vanished. It was like we'd crossed an invisible line into a different place. Then came the smell. It hit me first, a faint, foul odor on the wind. It was swampy and wet, like old garbage left in the sun, but with a sharp, musky undertone. Something like a wet dog, but heavier, more glandular. I wrinkled my nose. "You smell that?" Mark nodded, his face tight. "Smells like a gut pile. But there's no hunting season for deer yet. Maybe a poacher." The thought was unsettling. We weren't just in the middle of nowhere. We were in the middle of nowhere with someone who was already breaking the law. That automatically puts you on edge. The smell came and went as we drove, carried on the shifting breeze. Sometimes it was overpowering, making my eyes water, and other times it was gone completely. We were getting closer to the second camera, which was mounted on a big oak tree overlooking a natural clearing. The trail got rougher here, and Mark had to slow down, navigating around fallen logs and muddy patches. That's when we saw the tree. It was a young maple, maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter, growing right next to the trail. And it was snapped in half about 8 feet off the ground. Not cut. Snapped. The top half was bent over, the white wood of the break splintered and raw. Mark stopped the ATV again, and we both just stared at it. "No way a deer did that," I said, stating the obvious. Mark got off the machine and walked over to it, touching the splintered wood. "It's fresh, still wet." He looked up, trying to gauge the height of the break. "What the hell does that?" "A bear," I suggested. "A big one, climbing it?" He shook his head. A bear would leave claw marks all the way up. This is clean. It's just broken. Like someone just walked up and pushed it over. He looked around the base of the tree. There were some scuff marks in the dirt, but no clear prints, just a mess of disturbed leaves. We stood there for a few more minutes, the silent woods and the snapped tree and the foul smell all swirling together into a thick soup of wrongness. My brain was trying to find a logical explanation. A windstorm? No, only this one tree was damaged. A moose? Possible, they're huge, but they're incredibly rare this far south in the lower peninsula. Every rational explanation I came up with felt thin, like a cheap coat in a blizzard. Mark finally walked back to the ATV. "I don't like this, Dave," he said, and his voice was low. "The camera's just another 100 yards up. Let's grab it and head back to the cabin." I agreed immediately. The fun had evaporated from the day. Now, I just wanted to be back inside, with solid walls around me and a fire in the stove. That was the moment everything changed. That was when we stopped being two buddies on a joyride and became prey. Mark started the engine, and we crept forward, our heads on a swivel. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. The feeling of being watched was immense, a physical weight on my shoulders. The trail opened up into the clearing where the camera was mounted. The clearing was maybe 50 yards across, a patch of open ground covered in ferns and low brush. The big oak tree with the camera was on the far side. Mark drove us to the center of the clearing and stopped. He left the engine idling this time. "I'll be right back," he said, hopping off. He kept the rifle with him, holding it loosely in one hand. I stayed on the ATV, watching him walk toward the tree. My heart was hammering in my chest. I scanned the tree line, the dense wall of pines and undergrowth that surrounded us. The silence was still there, absolute and unnerving. Mark reached the tree and started to unstrap the camera. My eyes kept sweeping the perimeter, left to right, over and over. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a dramatic reveal. It was just there, on the edge of the woods, to the right of the oak tree, standing partially behind a thick pine. At first, my brain didn't even register what I was seeing. It looked like a man. A very tall man wearing some kind of dark, shaggy camouflage suit. A hunter, maybe. But he was just standing there, perfectly still, watching Mark. "Hey, Mark," I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak. "We got company." Mark froze, his hand still on the camera. He slowly turned his head, following my gaze. "What?" I pointed. "Over there, by that big pine." He squinted, and then I saw his body go rigid. "Who the hell is that?" he whispered, though the person was a good 40 yards away. I didn't have an answer. The figure hadn't moved a muscle. It was just watching. The more I looked, the less sense it made. The proportions were wrong. The arms seemed too long, hanging down almost to its knees. And it was tall. Taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had to be pushing 7, maybe 8 feet. My brain started throwing out explanations again. Guy on stilts? Some kind of weirdo in a costume trying to scare people? But we were miles from any road, deep in the bush. It made no sense. Then it moved. It didn't step out from behind the tree. It sort of flowed. It took one step forward, out of the shadows and into a patch of sunlight. And my entire world broke. It wasn't a man in a suit. My mind tried to tell me it was a bear, a big black bear standing on its hind legs. But it wasn't a bear. The head was wrong. It was long, canine, with a pronounced snout and pointed ears that were high on its head. The fur was dark, black, or a deep, matted brown, and it covered its entire body. But the worst part, the part that my brain still refuses to fully accept, was its legs. They were bent backwards, like a dog's, with the hock joint clearly visible. It stood there on two legs, but they were the legs of an animal. It took another step, and the movement was fluid, powerful, and utterly unnatural. It wasn't the clumsy waddle of a bear. It was a smooth, predatory gait. I could see its hands now, and they weren't paws. They were long-fingered and clawed, but they were shaped like human hands. It turned its head slightly, and for a terrifying second I thought it looked right at me. I couldn't make out its eyes from that distance, but I could feel them. "That's not real," I heard myself whisper. "That can't be real." Mark was still frozen by the tree, the rifle held halfway to his shoulder. He was making a low, guttural sound in his throat, a noise of pure animal fear. The thing in the clearing took another slow, deliberate step toward him. It wasn't rushing. It was assessing. It was confident. "Get on the bike, Mark!" I screamed, the words tearing out of my throat. "Now!" My voice seemed to break the spell. Mark scrambled backward, away from the tree, his eyes never leaving the creature. He fumbled with the rifle, trying to shoulder it properly. The creature stopped moving. It lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed both curious and menacing. Its shoulders were massive, broad and thick with muscle under the matted fur. I could see the power coiled in its frame, the latent strength in its haunches. Time seemed to stretch and distort. Everything was happening in slow motion. I could see the individual leaves drifting down from the trees. I could see the look of utter disbelief and terror on Mark's face. My own body was locked in place, my hands gripping the handlebars of the ATV so hard my knuckles were white. My mind was a screaming mess of denial. This isn't happening. I'm dreaming. It's a prank. But the smell was still there, stronger now, that rotten, musky stench. And the silence was still there, a heavy blanket over everything. The creature opened its mouth. I couldn't hear a sound from that distance, but I saw a flash of white. Teeth, long, yellowed canines. It let out a low growl that I felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to travel through the ground and up into the frame of the four-wheeler. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the oldest part of your brain, the part that only knows two words: predator and prey. And we were the prey. That sound finally broke my paralysis. I kicked the ATV into gear, the engine whining in protest. I wasn't thinking about Mark's camera anymore. I wasn't thinking about anything except the space between us and that thing. Mark started running, a clumsy, backward stumble toward me. "Get us out of here, Dave," he yelled, his voice cracking. The creature watched him run. It didn't give chase, not yet. It just stood there, its head tilted, as if it was enjoying the show, as if it knew it had all the time in the world. Mark finally reached the ATV and threw himself onto the seat behind me, nearly knocking us over. "Go, go, go," he screamed, pounding on my back. I twisted the throttle, and the machine lurched forward. The tires spun in the soft dirt for a second, then caught, and we shot out of the clearing, back onto the narrow two-track. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just focused on the trail ahead, a narrow ribbon of brown and green, and drove like my life depended on it. Because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it did. The engine was screaming, the suspension bottoming out as we hit ruts and rocks. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I didn't feel them. All I could hear was Mark's ragged breathing behind me
and the roar of the engine. We'd gone maybe a quarter of a mile, a frantic, high-speed blur of trees and sky, when Mark started yelling again. "It's coming! It's behind us!" I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. It was there. It was running on two legs, keeping pace with us just off the trail, crashing through the underbrush like it was nothing. And it was fast. Impossibly fast.
We were doing 30, maybe 35 miles an hour, which is terrifying on a trail that narrow, and it was matching our speed effortlessly. Its stride was immense, each leg seeming to devour 10 feet of ground. Its long arms pumped at its sides, and its head was low. It wasn't a sprint, it was a lope, a predatory ground-eating lope. It was hunting us. The sound of it was the worst part. A rhythmic crashing through the woods, the snap of branches, and a deep guttural panting that was somehow audible even over our engine. It was the sound of a locomotive made of muscle and teeth, and it was gaining on us. "Faster!" Mark screamed in my ear. I had the throttle pinned. There was no more speed to give. The trail ahead took a sharp turn to the left. I leaned into it, wrestling the handlebars, the tires threatening to lose their grip. For a second we lost sight of it. Maybe it gave up. A hopeful, idiotic thought flashed through my mind. Then it burst through the trees directly in front of us. It had cut the corner. It stood in the middle of the trail, not 20 yards away, blocking our path. It was bigger up close, so much bigger. Its chest was a barrel, its legs like tree trunks. Its face was a nightmare collage of wolf and something horribly, vaguely human. The eyes were what got me. They weren't the simple, reflective eyes of an animal. They were intelligent. They were yellow, and they were glowing with a malevolent light. And they were filled with hate. I slammed on the brakes. The ATV skidded sideways, fishtailing wildly before coming to a stop, the engine dying with a final, pathetic cough. We were 10 yards from it. Silence again. But this time it was filled with the creature's heavy, rasping breaths. It stood there, its shoulders heaving, saliva dripping from its long jaws onto the dead leaves. I could smell it now, a suffocating wave of wet fur, decay, and pure musk. It was the smell of a predator. Mark was fumbling with the rifle, trying to unstrap it from the scabbard. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't work the buckle. The creature took a step toward us. Its claws, thick and black, clicked on a rock on the trail. I was completely frozen. My body had just shut down. All I could do was stare into those yellow eyes and wait for the end. It took another step. Mark finally ripped the rifle free. He lifted it, the barrel wavering all over the place. The creature saw the movement and let out a roar. It wasn't a growl this time. It was a full-throated, blood-curdling roar that shook the very air around us. It was a sound of fury and dominance, a sound that promised violence. It took a half-step back, crouching slightly, tensing its powerful legs as if to spring. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. In that split second, as the creature gathered itself to lunge, something in my brain finally rebooted. It wasn't courage. It was just the instinct to survive, kicking in past the terror. I hit the ignition button. The starter whined, but the engine didn't catch. "Come on, come on, come on," I chanted under my breath, my thumb mashing the button again and again. The creature was still crouched, its yellow eyes locked on us, its lips peeled back from its teeth in a horrifying snarl. Whine, whine, whine. Mark was trying to aim the rifle, but he was sobbing, just openly weeping with fear. "I can't get a shot, Dave, I can't." The whine of the starter was the only sound in the world, besides our own ragged breathing, and the low, constant growl from the thing in front of us.
Then, with a roar of its own, the engine caught. It sputtered, coughed, and then screamed to life. The creature flinched at the sudden noise, taking an involuntary step back. That was all the opening I needed. I didn't think. I just acted.
I twisted the handlebars hard right, wrenched the throttle wide open, and drove the ATV straight off the trail and into the woods. It was a stupid, desperate move. We slammed into a wall of ferns and small saplings. Branches scraped and tore at us. The front wheels hit a half-rotten log, and the whole machine went airborne for a second before crashing back down, nearly throwing both of us off. But we were moving. We were creating distance. I could hear it behind us, crashing through the woods in pursuit, roaring in what sounded like pure rage. I had no idea where I was going. I was just plowing through the forest, dodging the bigger trees, hoping I didn't hit something that would stop us for good. Mark was holding on for dear life, his face buried in my back. I could feel him shaking. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, I broke through a line of thick brush and found myself on another trail. This one wider and more traveled.
It was one of the main arteries of the trail system. I didn't hesitate. I turned left and gunned it. The ATV was running rough now. Something was probably damaged from our off-road excursion, but it was running. I pushed it as hard as it would go. I glanced back once more. It was standing at the edge of the trees where we'd emerged, watching us go. It wasn't chasing us anymore. It was just standing there, a tall, dark silhouette against the autumn colors. And then, as if it was never there at all, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. We didn't slow down. I drove like a madman all the way back to the cabin, never letting the speed drop below 40. My mind was a blank slate of adrenaline and fear. I didn't start processing what had happened until I saw the familiar shape of the cabin through the trees. I pulled up so fast I sent a shower of gravel and dirt across the clearing. I killed the engine, and for a moment, we both just sat there, gasping for air, our bodies trembling uncontrollably. We stumbled into the cabin, and Mark immediately threw the heavy bolt on the door. He leaned against it, sliding down to the floor, the rifle still clutched in his hands. He was pale, his face streaked with dirt and tears. I collapsed into one of the rickety wooden chairs by the table, my legs giving out from under me. The silence in the cabin was a different kind of silence. It was safe. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just listened to the sound of our own hearts pounding. Finally, I managed to speak. My voice was a hoarse whisper. What was that? Mark just shook his head, staring at the floorboards. I don't know, man. I don't know. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a residual terror that mirrored my own. Did you see its eyes, Dave? Did you see them? I just nodded. I couldn't form the words to describe what I'd seen. The intelligence, the malice. We sat there as the afternoon light began to fade outside. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made us both jump. The woods we had loved just that morning now felt like a prison wall, holding something monstrous. Mark finally got up and started pacing the small room. We have to call someone, he said. The sheriff. DNR. Somebody. My first thought was, and tell them what? That we were chased by a monster from a campfire story? They'd think we were drunk or high. They'd laugh at us. But looking at Mark's terrified face, I knew we had to do something. We weren't staying another night in that cabin, that much was certain. There was no landline, and our cell phones had no service. Mark's truck was our only way out. We have to get to the truck and drive until we get a signal, I said. We're not staying here. The idea of going back outside, even just to get to the truck parked 50 feet away,
was terrifying, but the idea of staying was worse.
We decided to wait until it was fully dark,
On the flawed logic that maybe it wouldn't be expecting us to move then. We gathered our essential gear in a frantic rush, stuffing wallets and keys into our pockets. We left everything else. The food, the sleeping bags, the whiskey. None of it mattered. As dusk settled, we stood by the door, peering out the single small window. The clearing was empty. The woods were dark and silent. "Now," Mark whispered. We took a deep breath, and I unbolted the door. We moved fast, half running, half stumbling to the truck. My ears were straining, listening for any sound, any snapping twig, any low growl. But there was nothing. We threw ourselves into the truck, and I locked the doors. Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands still shaking. The engine turned over, and the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the trail leading away from the cabin. I've never been so happy to see headlights in my life.
We drove out of there, bouncing and jostling on the rough 2-track, not speaking, our eyes scanning the dark woods on either side. About 10 minutes later, Mark's phone chirped. 1 bar of service. He pulled over and dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded bored. He tried to explain what happened, his voice trembling. He said we were charged by a large, aggressive animal. He didn't know how else to put it. He mentioned a bear, maybe a wolf, but said it was on 2 legs. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The dispatcher told us to meet a sheriff's deputy at the gas station where the main highway met the county road. An hour later, we were standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a 24-hour gas station, telling our story to a deputy who looked like he was barely out of his teens. He listened patiently, his pen scratching on his notepad. He had a sympathetic look on his face, but his eyes were full of skepticism.
"So you're saying a bear stood up and chased your 4-wheeler?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Mark looked at me, his expression pleading. "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice flat. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a bear." The deputy nodded slowly. "Okay. Well, we've had reports of a large, possibly nuisance black bear in that area. Probably what you saw. Adrenaline can make things look different." He took our names, our addresses, and told us to be careful in the woods. He said a DNR officer might give us a call on Monday. And that was it. We were dismissed. A nuisance bear. We got back in the truck and drove the 4 hours home in almost complete silence. We never got a call from the DNR. Of course we didn't. What would they even investigate? The case of the bipedal nuisance bear? We didn't go back to the cabin to get our stuff. Mark's dad went up a few weeks later with 2 of his buddies, all of them armed. He said everything was just as we'd left it. The only thing he mentioned was that the trail camera we'd left on the oak tree was gone. Not the SD card. The entire camera, straps and all, had been ripped off the tree. The bark was gouged with deep scratches. He figured it was the bear the deputy had mentioned. Mark and I didn't talk about it for a long time. The trip had broken something between us. We'd been friends since kindergarten, but now, when we saw each other, that thing was there in the room with us. That shared memory was like a wall between us. He wanted to forget it, to file it away as a hallucination, a trick of the light. I couldn't. I had to know. I started spending nights online, falling down rabbit holes of folklore and cryptozoology. I typed phrases like, dog-headed creature in Michigan, running on 2 legs, yellow eyes. And I found it. The stories were all there, hundreds of them from all over the state, all over the country. People describing the same thing.
The same height, the same backwards legs, The same canine head, the same terrifying intelligence. They called it the Dogman, the Michigan Dogman. Reading those accounts was both terrifying and validating. I wasn't crazy. We weren't crazy. Other people had seen it. But that validation was a cold comfort. Knowing it had a name didn't make it any less real or any less horrifying. It just gave a label to the thing that had hunted us. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I don't go in the woods anymore. I used to love camping, hiking, hunting. Now, I can't even walk in a city park at dusk without feeling that old prickle of fear on the back of my neck. That feeling of being watched from the shadows. I have nightmares. In the dreams, I'm always back on that trail. The ATV engine is dead, and the thing is walking slowly towards me, those yellow eyes burning in the dark. I always wake up just before it reaches me. My wife knows something happened. I told her a version of the story, the one with the aggressive bear. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How do you tell the person you love that monsters are real and that you looked one in the eye? How do you explain that the world isn't the safe, predictable place we all pretend it is? So I carry it alone. It's a weight, a shadow that follows me through my perfectly normal, logical life. Sometimes, when I'm wiring a new house, standing in the skeleton of a frame, I'll look out the window at the tree line and I'll feel it. A flicker of that same primal fear. The knowledge that just beyond our well-lit, orderly world, something else exists. Something ancient and powerful and predatory. I'm sharing this story because I think people need to know. Not to scare them necessarily, but to warn them. We walk around in our comfortable lives thinking we have it all figured out, that we're at the top of the food chain. We're not. There are things out there, in the deep, quiet places of the world, that we don't understand. Things that were here long before we were, and will be here long after we're gone. And they watch us. I don't know what that thing was. Was it an undiscovered species of animal? A creature from some other dimension? A spirit of the forest? I don't have any answers. All I have is the memory of the silence, the smell, the impossible speed, and the intelligent, hateful light in its eyes. That's what haunts me the most. The intelligence. It wasn't just a dumb animal acting on instinct. It was thinking. It cut us off. It toyed with us. It seemed to enjoy our fear. That elevates it from a simple animal encounter to something far more terrifying. It means we weren't just in the presence of a predator. We were in the presence of an entity that understood what we were and hated us for it. My advice to anyone who spends time in the woods is simple. Listen to your gut. If a place feels wrong, if the animals go silent, leave. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to rationalize it. Just get in your car and drive away. Your instincts are older and wiser than your rational mind. They are what kept our ancestors alive when they were huddled around fires, listening to things moving in the darkness just beyond the light. We've forgotten how to listen to that part of ourselves, and I think that's a dangerous thing. I still see Mark sometimes. We grab a beer, talk about our kids. We never mention the cabin. We never mention what happened. It's an unspoken agreement, but I see it in his eyes sometimes, when he thinks I'm not looking. The same shadow that I see in the mirror. He knows. He just chooses not to. Maybe he's the smart one. But I can't forget. I can't unsee what I saw. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that clearing. I can see the creature stepping out from behind the tree, its canine head turning,
its yellow eyes finding mine across the distance.
That image is burned into my brain forever. It's a reminder that the map of the world we carry in our heads is incomplete. There are blank spaces marked, "Here be monsters." And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you wander right into them.